Oh, no.
Would you risk everything to save a stranger when your whole village treats you like dirt? Alzer is a widowed mother of 3, living in a cracked mud house, drowning in debt, shunned by everyone around her. One stormy day, she finds an injured man trapped in the forest. Despite fear, gossip, and her own poverty, she brings him home. But what no one expected was this. The man she saved wasn't just anyone. Obasi, once a respected hunter haunted by loss, slowly helps rebuild her broken world, fixing her roof, teaching her daughters to survive, and more than anything, seeing her worth. This story is based on a short film that touched millions because it speaks to something we all feel, that kindness, especially from those who have nothing, is the most powerful force on earth. Watch and discover how a poor widow turned public shame into public respect, why one act of courage saved a man and transformed her family's destiny, and what happened when he came back with a boat, a ring, and a new beginning. This is the story of Alzer. If you've ever felt invisible, this will remind you, being kind is never in vain. Watch now, because 60 seconds might just restore your faith in humanity. The cry tore through the trees like an animal caught in its own trap. Alzer froze, her bundle of firewood slipping from her grasp and scattering across the damp earth. The sound did not belong to the forest, not the shriek of a bird, not the wail of wind between the branches. It was human, sharp and ragged, a breath breaking under pain. She turned her head toward the northern thicket, where the ground dipped into shadow. The evening light was slipping, and in the darkening hush of the woods, the sound came again. Her heart pounded. She knew she should turn away. She had warned her daughters never to wander too close to this side of the forest. Rusty traps slept beneath the leaves, jaws waiting for a careless step. Just this morning she had seen a child nearly stumble into one, laughter turning to a scream as her mother yanked her back. The iron had clanged shut with a force that sent shivers down the spines of everyone nearby. Alzer had whispered a prayer of thanks, but carried the image all day like a stone in her chest. Now she stood alone. The cry was weaker the second time, muffled as though swallowed by earth. She bent down, brushing her calloused hand across the leaves, and picked up a half-broken stick. It felt foolish. What protection was a stick against whatever waited? But the sound had pierced something deeper than fear, something that pulsed at the root of her chest. She stepped forward, each footfall careful, each breath tight, until she saw him. A man sprawled against the mossy ground, one leg caught in the rusted jaws of an old hunting trap. Blood seeped across the damp soil, dark and thick, the metallic scent sharp in the air. His face was gray with pain, sweat beading along his hairline, his lips moving in a hoarse whisper. For a heartbeat, Alzer thought he was praying, but when she leaned closer, she heard a name tumble from his mouth. Brother. Her throat clenched. She should leave. A stranger with no story except the wreckage of his body, lying beside a trap she herself had warned her children about. If the villagers saw her with him, rumors would bloom like weeds. The foolish widow who dragged a vagrant into her crumbling house, who dared to care when she could barely feed her own daughters. Already they called her a burden, a debt she could never pay. The creditors had been at her door only that morning, their voices sharp with mockery. Next week, one had warned, or we take what's left of your house." She gripped the stick until her knuckles ached. She could walk away. Nobody would know she had seen him. She could return home, cook the thin porridge, tell her girls to stay quiet and hope the night passed without more humiliation. But the man's eyes opened suddenly, startling her. In them was not the emptiness of a vagabond, but something fierce and pleading, like a wild animal desperate for release. He tried to move his lips again, but no words came, only a sound caught between a groan and a gasp. Alzer dropped the stick. She pressed her weight onto the trap, hands trembling, and forced the jaws apart with every ounce of strength. The iron creaked, bit into her palm, scraped her skin raw. For a moment it resisted, then the rusted spring gave way with a groan, and the man's leg slipped free. He collapsed into her arms, heavier than she expected, the warmth of his blood seeping into her skirt. For a second she stood there stunned, holding the weight of another life. And then, without letting herself think, she heaved him onto her back. Her shoulders screamed under the burden, but she staggered toward the path. Branches whipped her face, mud sucked at her sandals, and the sky above deepened into a bruised purple. The twist struck her halfway down the path. From the edge of the trees came giggles, the neighbors' children chasing each other, their voices bright as they darted home for supper. Alzer stopped, panic clutching her chest. If they saw her like this, carrying a bleeding man, the whole village would know before dawn. She pressed her back against a tree, holding still, breath shallow. The children passed without looking, but the moment left her shaken. It was not only the weight of the stranger she carried, it was the weight of every word that would be spoken about her once this secret slipped free. She reached her house just as night fell. The cracked mud walls loomed pale in the darkness. The roof slanted and patched with straw. Inside, the faint glow of an oil lamp flickered through the torn cloth that served as a door. Her daughters were waiting, 3 faces peering out into the dusk. The eldest gasped when she saw the man slumped over their mother's shoulders. "Mother, no," she whispered, her voice tight. "We have nothing. You can't." The middle child stepped forward, eyes wide with pity. "He's dying. We can't leave him." The youngest, too curious for fear, tiptoed closer, her small hand brushing the man's bloodied sleeve. "Who is he?" Alzer's breath shook. "He is someone who needs us," she said, though her voice was barely more than a whisper. She laid him on the old mat near the wall, his chest rising in shallow jerks. The daughters clustered close, their whispers colliding, fear, anger, compassion all tangled. The lamp's flame trembled, throwing long shadows across the cracked walls, making the house look more fragile than ever. Outside, the wind carried the sound of neighbors calling to each other, the village alive with gossip as always. She could almost hear them already. The widow has taken in a stranger, a beggar, maybe a thief. The man stirred, his lips parting again. Alzer leaned in. His voice was faint, but the word that came was clear. "Brother," he murmured once more, then drifted into silence, eyes rolling shut. A chill swept through her. It was not only pain speaking. There was a story buried inside him, a memory that clawed its way to the surface even as his body failed. She pressed a cloth against his wound, watching blood seep through, and for the first time she allowed herself to wonder who he truly was. The night stretched long. She fed her daughters thin gruel and sent them to their sleeping mats, though they whispered questions until sleep claimed them. Alone beside the stranger, she listened to the uneven rhythm of his breath. Outside, the crickets sang. The lapping of the nearby stream echoed faintly, and the world seemed balanced on a knife's edge. Her eyes wandered to the ceiling where the storm from weeks past had left gaps between the reeds. Rain would come soon, and the roof would leak again. She should be fixing it, should be thinking of debts and the landlord's threats. Instead, she sat watching a man whose name she did not know, a man whose blood stained her hands. The lamp burned low. She touched the coarse cloth she had wrapped around his leg, then reached for a small clay jug to moisten his lips. He did not wake. The scent of iron lingered in the air, mixing with smoke from the dying flame. At last, she lay down beside her daughters, her body aching, but her mind would not rest. The villagers would ask questions. The creditors would not wait. And yet, something had shifted. In choosing to carry him from the forest, she had crossed an invisible line. The darkness pressed heavy, and still she saw the image of his eyes opening in the forest, filled with that desperate plea. It was as though she had rescued not just a man, but a secret that would demand everything from her. And as the night deepened, with the stranger breathing raggedly in her home, she felt the ground of her life tilt. Somewhere in the distance, the stream whispered against its stones, carrying away the silence of the forest, carrying her into a dawn she could not yet imagine. The pounding came at the door before the sun had lifted its pale light across the village. Alzer jolted awake, her body stiff from the floor, her ears straining. The man still lay where she had left him, his chest rising in shallow pulls of air. Her eldest daughter's eyes darted toward the door, fear widening them. The pounding came again, louder this time, accompanied by a voice sharp and commanding. "Open. I know you're in there." Alzer rose, her heart lurching. It was the creditor, his tone carrying both impatience and the smug satisfaction of someone who believed he owned not just her house, but her dignity. She pulled the cloth curtain aside, forcing her voice steady. "It is early. Why are you here?" The man outside smirked, his frame filling the doorway, his presence stinking of arrogance, as much as the sweat from his journey. "I came to remind you, next week is the end. No excuses, no delay. Pay or lose the house. I wanted to see your face when you heard it." His eyes wandered past her shoulder, searching. For a moment, Alzer felt the world tilt. Could he smell the iron tang of blood still lingering in the house? Could he see the stranger sprawled behind the thin shadow of her eldest daughter? She straightened, blocking his view. "I heard you the first time." She forced the words out like stones. "We will not fail." His laughter grated against the walls, and with a shake of his head he turned away. The dust of his sandals drifted into the room as he walked down the path. The echo of his threat clung like smoke, filling every crack in the mud walls. Behind her, the daughters erupted. The eldest hissed in fury. "Mother, how can you promise him that? We have nothing. And now you bring this man into our home? What will they say when they find out?" Her hands clenched at her sides, her face tight with fear and resentment. The middle daughter knelt beside the stranger, touching the edge of the cloth around his leg. Her voice was soft but carried an edge of steel. "What will they say if we let him die? You taught us better." The youngest giggled nervously, circling him as though he were some wild animal. "He looks strong even when he's broken. Who do you think he is?" The house filled with their clashing voices, the flicker of the lamp struggling to hold its glow in the gray dawn. Alzer felt the weight of every argument pressing into her skin. The walls seemed to lean inward, suffocating, as if even the house itself demanded an answer. She crouched down, meeting each daughter's eyes in turn. I carried him because he was bleeding into the earth. If it were you, alone in the forest, wouldn't you hope someone would choose to see you as a person, not a burden? Her words faltered, heavy with her own reflection. She had lived for years under the gaze of a village that saw her as nothing but debt and shame. Now she had chosen differently, even if it crushed her. By midday, the whispers had already begun. Alzer stepped outside to fetch water from the stream, and the voices drifted from neighbors' doorways. The widow hides a man inside. A hunter, they say, dangerous. How will she feed her own children now? Their words carried like spears thrown casually in daylight, meant to wound even if unseen. She walked faster, her jar heavy on her head, every whisper cutting deeper. The forest shadow seemed safer than the open path of her own village. By the time she returned home, her chest ached not from the weight of the water, but from the certainty that the world had already made its judgment. Inside, the stranger stirred. His eyes opened, dark and cloudy, scanning the low ceiling and the cracked walls. His voice rasped, "Where am I?" The daughters fell silent. Alzer knelt beside him, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. "In a place that will not turn you away." His gaze shifted toward her youngest child, whose wide eyes watched him without fear. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, confusion, then something almost like relief. His lips moved again, but no full sentence came, only fragments of sound, as if words had been lost on the long road to this moment. The eldest daughter whispered sharply, "He will bring ruin. The village already speaks. What if he is dangerous?" Alzer's voice caught, but she steadied it. "Danger lies in letting the world decide who we are. We will find our own path." The hours dragged, filled with the rhythm of survival, boiling what little grain remained, feeding the children, tending to the stranger's wound. Each act carried the sting of sacrifice. The pot of porridge grew thinner with every meal. The girls' stomachs grumbled louder, and still she fed him too. As evening settled, the unexpected shift came. The man, weak and trembling, tried to rise. Alzer reached to stop him, but he pushed against her arm. He leaned on the wall, sweat glistening along his temples, and with slow, deliberate care, he lifted a fallen reed from the roof pile. His hands, though shaking, moved with practiced precision. He twisted, knotted, and fastened it to the hole where the storm had torn away cover. For a moment, Alzer forgot to breathe. He was mending her house. The daughters watched in silence. The youngest clapped her hands, delighted. The middle smiled, her doubt softening. The eldest frowned, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something she fought to hide. The man sagged back to the floor, drained, but his eyes held a stubborn spark. He whispered, almost inaudible, "Not useless." The words hung in the room like a defiance aimed at more than himself. They were meant for the village, for the creditors, for every whisper that claimed broken men or broken women had no worth. Night crept in, carrying with it the smell of rain on the horizon. The lamp's flame danced, shadows stretching across the patched roof, now carrying one reed stronger than before. Alzer sat in the dim light, her daughters clustered around her, the man breathing softly against the mat. She felt the world shifting, the lines between ruin and redemption blurring in ways she could not yet name. But the house seemed different tonight, not just a shelter of mud and straw, not just a cracked cage of poverty. With one stranger inside, it had become something else, something fragile, dangerous, but alive with the possibility of change. As the rain began to patter against the roof, Alzer lay back, her body aching from the day's battles, her mind restless with dread and a strange new hope. She closed her eyes, but even in the darkness she saw the glimmer of that single reed, tied firm where before there had been only emptiness, and she wondered, as the storm sang above them, what it meant to choose compassion over safety, and whether her choice tonight had saved them or doomed them all. The pot hissed, though there was almost nothing inside it. A thin line of steam rose from the watery porridge, filling the air with a sour, burnt smell. Alzer stirred slowly, her stomach clenching at the sound of her daughter shifting behind her. Hunger had made them restless, turning even silence into an ache. She poured the gruel into 3 wooden bowls, each barely coated at the bottom. Her girls crouched close, clutching the bowls with both hands, slurping the watery meal with the desperation of children who knew better than to ask for more. Behind them, the stranger muttered again in his sleep, his body twisted, his face damp with sweat. His lips opened, and a single word broke from him like a wound reopening. Brother. It was the same word that had haunted her since the forest, but this time he said it with such raw anguish that even the youngest daughter looked up, her mouth dripping with porridge, her eyes wide with unease. Alzer pressed the cloth tighter around his wounded leg. He shivered, murmuring fragments, snatches of sounds that meant nothing and everything. She leaned close and heard a phrase caught in fever. I should have. I left him. His voice cracked into a moan. The middle daughter whispered, Mother, is he calling for someone who is gone? Alzer didn't answer. She could not tell them that she recognized grief when she heard it. It sounded too much like her own sleepless nights after her husband's death. By noon, the whispers from outside pressed against their walls. Children passing the house chanted little songs, cruel rhymes that cut sharper than knives. The widow feeds a wolf. The widow hides a snake. Their voices trailed into laughter, daring each other to peek inside her broken window. Alzer tried to ignore them, but the words scraped at her chest. The eldest daughter spat into the dirt. Let them talk. When hunger swallows us, they will laugh even harder. He eats what we cannot spare. As if in answer, the stranger groaned again, thrashing lightly. He tried to sit up, but pain pinned him down. For a moment, Alzer thought he might collapse back into silence. Instead, he surprised her. With trembling arms, he pushed himself toward the door. He grasped the edge of a broken basket lying near the wall, his fingers moving with slow precision. Thread by thread, he began weaving it back together. The girl stared. The youngest whispered, Why does he do that? The eldest crossed her arms. Because he feels guilty for stealing our food. But Alzer's breath caught. His hands were calloused, the scars old, his movements practiced. Each pull of the reed carried the memory of labor, not aimless survival. The basket began to take shape beneath his fingers. The gaping holes closed stitch by stitch. He did not look at them, did not ask for praise, only worked until his strength gave out. When he slumped against the wall, the repaired basket lay beside him, simple but whole. Alzer's daughters looked at it as though it were a strange offering from a man who had no right to give anything. By evening, he surprised them again. He dragged himself to the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame, and pointed weakly toward the forest. Rabbit, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Before Alzer could stop him, he had taken the broken snare rope lying in the corner and staggered outside. The daughters shouted in protest, the eldest calling him reckless, the middle begging him to stop. But Alzer followed him at a distance, torn between fear and a pull she could not name. The forest was dusk-lit, shadows stretching long between the trees. His steps faltered, his wound seeping fresh blood, but his focus was sharp. He bent low, hands shaking, and set the crude snare. Minutes passed. The woods hushed. Then a sudden snap, and the man pulled from the trap a rabbit kicking wildly. His eyes closed, as though he were offering thanks to something unseen. He returned staggering, the rabbit in hand. The eldest's lips tightened, her resentment cracking into awe despite herself. The middle daughter lit the fire, her hands quick with hope. The youngest clapped, calling it magic. The smell of roasting meat filled the house that night, rich and heavy, so different from the sour water they had grown used to. The stranger ate only a small piece before laying the rest before the girls. His face was pale, lips bloodless, but his eyes held a strange fire. That night, as the flames dimmed and the children slept, Alzer sat beside him. His hands rested limp across his knees, but they twitched whenever sparks flew. She noticed how, even in sleep, his fingers drummed lightly against the floor, knuckles tapping as if remembering iron against iron. Each sound was hollow, metallic, unsettling. She reached out without thinking, touching his hand to still it. He jerked awake with a gasp, his eyes wild as though expecting chains. For a moment she saw terror, not pain in his gaze. He blinked, swallowed, then turned his eyes away. The sound, he muttered, barely audible. I hear the sound of metal even when there is none. Her throat tightened. She did not press him, but the confession hung heavy, telling her that his wounds went deeper than flesh. The next day, the youngest followed him quietly when he limped outside. She crouched behind a tree, watching as he tested his strength near the stream. He lifted stones, stacked them carefully, then let the water run over them, staring as though searching for something lost. When he noticed her, he didn't chase her away. Instead, he smiled faintly and motioned her closer. She skipped forward, fearless, and sat beside him. From that moment, a fragile bond formed. She began to tell her sisters how he was not dangerous, how he worked even while broken, how he gave more than he took. The middle child believed her quickly. The eldest refused, but her silence grew longer each day. The villagers, however, were not silent. Their whispers hardened into warnings. Old men at the well shook their heads. Women passing on the path muttered that Alzer had lost her mind. The hunter has returned, one said. Blood follows him. She will pay the price. That night, Alzer heard the voices in her sleep, mixed with the metallic clang that haunted the stranger's dreams. She woke trembling, unsure if the sounds were his nightmares or her own. When dawn broke, the man sat near the door, mending another basket. The youngest rested her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, as if he were already part of the family. Alzer's chest ached at the sight. She wanted to believe it could last, but she knew how swiftly kindness could turn to cruelty in the eyes of the village. The stream behind the house shimmered with the morning light. Alzer watched it and felt a chill, though the air was warm. The water seemed to whisper of journeys yet to come, of burdens carried not across land, but across time. She looked back at the man, his scarred hands moving steadily, and wondered if the same iron that broke him might one day break her too. And in that fragile dawn, with the rabbit bones still crackling in the fire pit, and the whispers of the village swelling outside her walls, Alzer felt both the birth of trust and the weight of a storm she could not yet see. The scream ripped through the night, but it wasn't from pain this time. It was the startled cry of the youngest daughter, who had risen to fetch water and found Obasi outside in the pale moonlight, crouched by the broken fence with his head in his hands. His chest heaved as though he had run for miles, though he had not moved from the yard. His breath came ragged, a low moan tearing free between clenched teeth. The girl had never seen a grown man shake like that, not even when her father was sick before he died. Alzer rushed out, her bare feet scraping against the dirt. She found Obasi clutching his leg where the trap scarred him, though the wound had mostly closed. His eyes were wild, unfocused, lost somewhere deep in memory. His palm slapped the ground again and again, as if striking an enemy who wasn't there. Each hit made the sound of flesh against earth echo like the ghost of iron. She knelt beside him. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her feared the answer. Obasi's lips moved, broken words stumbling out. "I saw his face. My brother. He called to me. I didn't pull him out. I ran. I left him in the cage." He choked, the confession spilling before he even realized she had heard. For a long moment, the only sound was the heavy thrum of night insects. The eldest daughter appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, but her expression softened against the rawness of his words. The youngest clung to her mother's skirt, silent now, her wide eyes searching. Alzer pressed her hand over his fist to stop the blows against the ground. "You cannot fight shadows," she whispered. "They will always be stronger." His head bowed as tears streaked the dirt on his cheeks. It was the first time he had truly broken before them, the hunter's silence stripped away. The twist of his grief was not that he had killed, but that he had abandoned, the guilt heavier than any chain. When dawn came, he sat weakly by the hearth, his body hollow but his voice steadier. He told them of the ambush, of how he and his younger brother had set out to trap game, how the night fell and the metal snapped, and how fear had drowned him. His brother's scream still rang in his skull. "I ran from the forest that night, but I never outran the sound." His eyes lifted, desperate for judgment. The middle daughter touched his shoulder gently. "You came back," she said simply, though she had not lived the memory. To her, the man before her was proof enough of survival. The eldest, more guarded, muttered, "You came here, to us. Does that mean you are done running?" Her question lingered, sharp yet searching, as though she wanted to believe but could not let herself trust too easily. Alzer's chest ached. She saw the weight he carried, so alike to her own. The nights when she blamed herself for her husband's death, for not seeing the illness sooner, for not saving him when perhaps there was nothing to be done. Grief was a language she knew too well. The days that followed brought a quiet change. Obasi, though still frail, began to speak more, his voice low but steady. He told stories of the forest, of animals he had tracked, of the way the earth gave signs if one learned to listen. The children leaned closer each night, eyes wide as the lamplight flickered. Even the eldest, though reluctant, sat within reach of his words. He showed them how to weave reeds tighter, how to lay sticks across the roof, so the rain would not find its way in. His hands, scarred and rough, moved with patience. Every act felt like a man trying to stitch himself back into the world. One evening, as the fire cracked and shadows stretched tall along the walls, Alzer sat across from him. She told him of her own loss, how her husband had gone to the river one morning, strong and laughing, and by nightfall, he was gone. a fever that took him quick, leaving her with debts heavier than stone. She had been forced to kneel before neighbors, to beg for credit, to endure their looks that said she was nothing without a man. Her voice did not shake as she spoke, but her hands did. Obasi listened, his brow furrowed, his body still. When she finished, he lowered his gaze. "We are both ghosts, then," he murmured, "living among the living, but carrying the dead." Her eyes filled, though no tears fell. "Perhaps," she said. "But even ghosts need warmth." The word sank into the room like a prayer neither had meant to speak aloud. From that night, the household shifted. Meals were shared without hesitation. Laughter returned in small bursts, like birds testing the air after storm clouds. The daughters began to call him by name, tentative at first, then more freely. Even the eldest, who once spat doubt, now softened enough to hand him a tool without protest. One afternoon, he sat beneath the shade of the crooked tree by the stream. The girls gathered around him. He carved small figures from leftover wood, shaping them into animals, rabbit, bird, even a fish with scales cut into the surface. The youngest squealed with delight, clutching hers tightly. For a moment the air felt lighter, the house not just a place of survival, but of something close to joy. But the shadow of the village lingered. When Alzer walked to the market, she felt the eyes upon her, the whispers sliding like knives between stalls. She feeds him like a husband. She shames herself again. She ignored them, holding her head high, though each word gnawed inside. Yet when she returned home and saw Obasi bent over the roof, with the eldest holding nails for him, she felt a fragile defiance rise in her. That night, as the family sat together, Obasi leaned back, exhaustion painting his features, but peace softening his mouth. "You gave me a place when I had none," he said quietly. "I do not know how to repay it." Alzer met his gaze. "You repay it each time you breathe and do not give up." The youngest curled into his side, already drifting into sleep. The firelight danced across his scarred hands, and for the first time they did not look like instruments of violence, but of repair. Outside the wind stirred, carrying the scent of rain. The stream behind the house gleamed under the moon, rippling like a path waiting to be walked. Alzer's heart beat slow and heavy as she watched him, her daughters safe in the glow of the fire. Yet beneath the warmth, a question burned. Had she welcomed a man who would bring them redemption, or had she tethered her family to a storm not yet unleashed? The night closed in, the crickets loud, the lamplight flickering low. In the silence, their breaths blended, fragile threads binding broken lives together. And as she lay down, Alzer knew the world outside would not wait long before testing whatever fragile peace they had found. The sky split open with a roar that shook the earth. Rain slammed against the village roofs, rattling the patched straw, until it peeled away in strips. The trees groaned like wounded giants, their branches snapping and falling into the mud. Thunder rolled across the hills, so close it felt as if the heavens themselves were caving in. Alzer clutched her youngest child to her chest as water poured through the cracks of the roof. The fire hissed and died, leaving only the stench of smoke and wet ash. Through the chaos, Obasi stood at the doorway, his silhouette framed by sheets of rain. His face was taut with something deeper than fear. He looked into the storm as though it were calling his name. His breath came fast, his fists clenched. Then he turned to her, his voice nearly drowned by the thunder. "I have to go." Alzer's heart seized. "Where?" He looked past her toward the forest, his eyes burning with guilt and resolve. The traps. The old iron still waits. Children wander there. If the storm brings them closer, if they stumble. His words were carried away by the wind. Before she could stop him, he stepped out into the rain, the water swallowing him whole. For a moment she stood frozen, the weight of his decision crashing against her. He was choosing to walk back into the same forest that had once broken him. She shouted after him, but the storm devoured her voice. Her daughters clung to her, their eyes wide with terror. The eldest hissed, "Let him go. He will kill himself." The middle child shook her head. "No, he's trying to save others." The youngest simply wept, her arms wrapping tighter around her mother's waist. Alzer's mind raced. She saw again the iron jaws closing on his leg, the blood, the terror. She imagined him stumbling into another trap, swallowed by the storm. Yet a stronger thought rose. If he fell, and no one came for him, he would be lost again. Just as he had lost his brother, she ripped a cloth from the wall and threw it over her shoulders. "Stay here. Watch each other," she commanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Before they could answer, she darted into the storm. The rain slapped her skin like whips. Mud pulled at her ankles, sucking her down. Branches clawed her arms. She pushed forward, her breath burning. The forest loomed, darker than she had ever known it, each tree bending low under the weight of water. Through the blur of rain she caught a glimpse of him. Obasi wrestled with a rusted trap half buried beneath the roots. His hands were raw, his face twisted, but he pried at the iron, wrenching it loose with a guttural cry. The trap snapped open, its clang slicing through the storm. He hurled it aside, chest heaving. She called his name, but he was already moving deeper. She stumbled after him, nearly falling as her sandal tore in the mud. The lightning split the sky, illuminating his figure bent over another trap. This one resisted, the metal still strong despite the years. He strained, his muscles shaking, the storm hammering him down. Then, with a cruel hiss, it slipped and clamped onto his leg. The sound pierced her heart. He collapsed into the mud, the rain washing over him in rivers. His cry was swallowed by thunder. She lurched forward, her body screaming against the weight of water and fear. She fell to her knees beside him. Blood gushed from the wound, the iron jaws biting deep. His eyes locked on hers, wild with both agony and shame. "Leave me," he gasped. "They'll laugh at you again. They'll say you saved a man who never should have been saved." She gritted her teeth, her hands already on the trap. "Let them laugh." Her voice broke, but did not waver. "I won't lose another to the forest." She pulled. The iron tore at her palms, slicing skin. Her body shook with effort, the storm battering her down. But she held on. For a moment it felt as if the storm itself pressed against her, daring her to surrender. Then the rusted hinge gave way with a shriek, and the trap fell open. He sagged against her, his weight crushing, but she heaved him onto her back. Her feet sank deep into the mud, but she pushed forward, every step a battle. Lightning lit the path ahead, and she stumbled through the downpour, her breath ragged, her legs trembling under the burden. The village came into view, torches flickering through the rain, faces gathering at the edge of the path. Whispers spread like fire. "She's carrying him." Again? She has chosen the stranger over us, but then something shifted. A young man stepped forward, his jaw clenched. He rushed to take the trap from her bleeding hands. An old woman shuffled forward with a bowl of hot broth, her shawl soaked through. A few others pushed past the rest, reaching to steady Obasi's weight. The laughter faltered. The jeers fell silent. Alzer pressed on, her body nearly breaking. She carried him across the village square, the storm pouring over them, blood mixing with rain. Each step was a defiance, each breath a refusal to let him fall. When she reached the doorway of her house, she nearly collapsed. Her daughters cried out, rushing to help. Obasi's eyes fluttered open, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came, only a look that carried both shame and something like gratitude. Alzer turned back toward the watching villagers. Her face was pale, her hair plastered to her skin, but her eyes were fierce. She held his weight like a banner, daring them to deny his humanity. The storm howled behind her, the lightning flashing as though to etch the moment into the sky itself. The silence that followed was thicker than the rain. For the first time she saw doubt in their eyes, cracks in the certainty of their judgment. The storm had not only tested her, but had shaken them too. Inside she laid him down, her hands trembling from exhaustion. Blood seeped through the cloth, the wound ugly and deep. She pressed harder, her own cuts stinging, her breath short. Around her, the walls of the house seemed to groan under the weight of the storm. Her daughters gathered close, their faces pale with fear. The eldest whispered, "He will not survive this." The youngest sobbed, clutching his arm. The middle child looked at her mother with eyes full of fire. "You carried him once. You can carry him again. Don't let him go." Alzer bent over the wound, her tears mixing with the rain still dripping from her hair. The storm raged outside, but inside there was only the sound of his ragged breathing and her daughter's fragile hope. She knew the night was not finished. The storm would not pass quickly, and the village would not forget what it had seen. She pressed her hands harder against the bleeding, whispering words that trembled between prayer and defiance, and in that dim light, with blood and rain pooling beneath them, she wondered if the choice she had made had saved them all, or doomed them forever. Blood thinned in the rain and ran in a crooked line across the square. It shimmered under a sky the color of tarnished tin. Alzer stood in the open with her palms torn and raw, her hair plastered to her face, her breath short from carrying a man heavier than any judgment. Around her the villagers gathered in a rough circle. Oil lamps flickered under shawls. Wet shoulders bumped. A dog shivered under a bench. At the front, the headman lifted a rust-bitten trap, as though it were a gavel, and the whole square his court. "You choose the stranger over the village," his voice carried, brittle and sure, thinner than the steel in his hand. Behind Alzer, Obasi leaned against the door frame, one knee wrapped in cloth, the other leg trembling. The wound had bled through again. His face was white with pain, his eyes narrow with stubbornness. Rain hissed on the ground, steamed off the charcoal of a dying cooking fire, and left the square smelling like wet iron and smoke. Alzer's heart battered her chest. She could feel the steady gaze of her eldest daughter like a hand between her shoulder blades, pushing her to stand straight. The youngest clutched the door frame. The middle child's lips moved soundlessly. Prayers or warnings Alzer couldn't tell. "I choose the human being over fear," she said. The words surprised even herself. They came out low, but they didn't shake. A murmur shivered through the crowd. The headman's jaw set. He held up the trap, water threading from its teeth. "Fear keeps children alive," he said. "Fear keeps order. That thing, he swung the iron in a small circle, wasn't set by the sky. A man set it, a man who hunts and forgets. And now you shelter such a man. Wet sandals scraped. A few men nodded. Others stared at the ground. A woman at the well tightened her shawl, eyes sharp above it. The old trader coughed into his sleeve. The storm, though passing, still growled behind the hills. Alzer's hands burned, but she didn't lower them. Those jaws bit him too, she said. He bled where our children almost bled. She looked toward the northern tree line where the wind had scored the horizon. The memory of the forest's black mouth rose in her throat, slick roots, whiplash branches, the metallic shriek when the spring finally gave. He went into that mess to pull the teeth out of the ground. Someone snorted, or he set them and calls it kindness to undo his own work. The headman glanced at the sky, impatient. He lifted another object from his satchel. Strips of red cloth knotted onto a branch, rain dark and flapping. Found along the north path, Halaon, he said. Marks, like a hunter's sign. Territory. Who am I supposed to thank for that? Who am I supposed to blame? A ripple moved through the circle. Children made themselves taller to see. Alzer's chest tightened. The strip tugged at something familiar. Color. Weave. A tear pattern like a jagged mouth. She looked down at the edge of her own shawl, frayed where she'd ripped a length the night she ran into the storm. Wind flogged the red cloth in the headman's hand. It looked like a warning flag or a lifeline. Depending on the eyes, Obasi stirred. His fingers twitched, that old reflex waking as if iron were in the air. His knuckles tapped once against the doorframe. A hollow sound, almost a memory of metal. He swallowed. I tied them, he said, voice gravel, to tell the children where not to step. Laughter tittered like rain off a tin roof. A hunter's mercy, someone whispered. Then the square shifted. 2 young men stepped out from the crowd, not the loudest ones. Shoulders broad, sleeves soaked, eyes steady. One took the trap from the headman without asking and set it down gently, as if the metal were a sick animal. The other moved to Obasi's side and slipped a shoulder under his arm with no theater at all. The headman jerked his chin. You will regret that, he told them. The taller youth shrugged. He bled for us last night, he said. Simple as naming rain. An old woman shuffled forward with a clay bowl covered in a cloth. Steam rose around her knuckles. She stopped in front of Alzer and lifted the cloth. Porridge, thick and hot. She thrust it into Alzer's hands without meeting her eyes. Eat, she said. Your strength is the only roof you have. The square breathed. It was not forgiveness. It was not surrender. It was the first softening of a hard soil. The headman's lips thinned. You think storms make saints, he said. They don't. They just leave wreckage. He pointed the broken branch with the red knot toward the forest. These marks were not made for us. They were made to tell other men where to find something. Before Alzer could answer, a cry rose from the path, thin with panic. A woman ran into the square drenched to the waist, her skirt heavy with mud, hair in ropes, eyes flashing wide. In her arms, a boy clung like a limpet, 8, maybe 9, his foot wrapped in leaves, blood seeping through. The mother skidded, nearly fell, then pushed the child forward with shaking hands. He was missing, she gasped. Since last night. He followed the stream to look for our goats. The flood took him off the path. She turned in a wild circle, searching faces, then fixated on the headman with a ferocity that made him step back. He came back because of these. Her voice broke. She lifted a strip of wet red cloth tied to a twig. It's not tight and small. These saved him. Silence fell like a blanket. So sudden even the dog stopped trembling. The boy's lips cracked into a brave line. He dug in his pocket and produced a smaller thing, a coil of thin reed, knotted in a very particular way. The same knot as on the repaired basket by Alzer's door, the same tight rhythm Obasi's fingers used even when his body was broken. He left this by the water, the boy whispered, where the ground sank, where the teeth were. The headman's eyes darted between the reed, the cloth, the trap. Something in his face flickered, flamed, then smothered. His voice turned blunt. "Who left it?" he asked, though the answer lay in the boy's hands. "The man with the wound," the mother said, and something like shame cracked through the steel of her anger. She looked at Obasi, at Alzer, at the daughters whose shoulders had straightened while the square watched them. Her mouth worked. She swallowed. "He took the traps out. He tied the path. Her voice failed. She set a rough palm over her son's hair and closed her eyes. A low murmur rose, not the earlier hiss of judgment, the noise of people doing sums inside themselves, the price of pride, the weight of gratitude, the way truth rearranges a room. The headman set the red-marked branch down. Rain pattered on the square stones. He lifted his chin toward Obasi. "If you stay," he said, "you work for us, not around us. You come to me first." His tone was still iron, but a hairline fracture had appeared. "I will not have marks in my forests. I did not approve." Alzer's breath loosened. Her legs went watery. "He will work with us," she said, not as apology, not as triumph, as a new border drawn in mud. Obasi tried to stand without the young men's help. His leg buckled. He caught himself on the doorframe again, fingers pressing so hard the wood complained. He looked at the boy with the leaf-wrapped foot. Their eyes met, two animals who had both survived teeth. Obasi's mouth opened, then closed. He bowed his head, a gesture as old as fire, older than the headman's office. "Bring him inside, Gonzalo," the old woman said to no one in particular, and then to everyone. She turned and shuffled toward her own house. "I'll fetch more porridge. There's a storm in his veins we can't argue with." Lantern light shifted as bodies moved. The square slowly broke apart, like wet bread in a hand. Some walked off without looking back. Some glanced over shoulders, plain curiosity wrestling old disdain. The two young men eased Obasi through the doorway. Alzer reached for the bowl, for the girls. For the moment it offered like a small, stubborn flame. Inside, the house smelled of damp straw and iron and the faint sweetness of the wood figures Obasi had carved for the children. The repaired basket sat by the wall, reed knots tight. The roof no longer wept in so many places. The fire coaxed back from blackness, licked toward warmth. The eldest daughter poured water carefully, her hands steady now. The middle child unwrapped clean cloth, the edges hemmed by her own quick stitches. The youngest hovered a breath from Obasi's side, eyes large, voice pinned to her throat. Obasi tried to speak. The sound that came was not apology and not explanation. "I didn't run this time," he said, rough. He looked at Alzer and waited for the verdict he had dodged for years. She nodded once, as if to say the earth had indeed shifted, and she had felt the change under her feet. She rinsed the blood from his leg, the water swirling pink in the bowl. Every touch was practical. Every touch was also a vow. Outside, the storm softened to a hiss, then to a whisper. The square drained itself of standing water. Small streams threaded toward the back of the house, slid under the fence, and joined the brook beyond. The sky lightened in a bruise-purple band. The smell of wet soil rose like bread. Footsteps at the door. The headman, again. Alone this time, the trap no longer in his hand. He did not enter. He stood under the lintel with the rain at his back and looked older than he had in the square. "You took out more than one?" he asked. Obasi nodded. "As many as I could reach before the hinge bit me." The headman's eyes landed on the reed basket, on the girls, on the man whose hands made and unmade, broke and rebuilt. He rubbed his forehead as if it ached. "There are others beyond the north path," he said. "Old places no one walks, too close to the stream. They should be gone, then they'll be gone," Alzer said. Not a challenge, a statement that pulled breath into the room. He looked at her as if seeing the shape of her for the first time. "You carry heavy things," he said. "I carried my life," she answered. "He was part of it last night." A pause. The headman sniffed, as though the air had changed, as though he was learning the smell of humility and not liking it. Then he stepped back into the thinning rain and left without another word. Night edged in with less anger than before. The youngest fell asleep with her head on Obasi's thigh, breath soft, hand open on his knee. The eldest cleaned the last of the blood from the floor, a frown between her brows that was concentration, not scorn. The middle stretched a reed across a gap in the roof and tied it, the knot neat, learning by doing. Outside, someone's laughter floated light from a doorway and did not sound cruel. When the square emptied fully, the old woman returned with another bowl, this one richer than the first. She set it down on the floor and covered it to keep it warm. "Tomorrow," she said, voice matter-of-fact, "you'll need strength more than pride." She started to leave, then looked down at Alzer's hands. "Salt and ash," she said, touching the torn palms with a healer's frankness. "Rub it in. It stings. It cleans." She gave a half-smile that looked like a memory of girlhood and slipped back into the night. The fire settled. The room breathed. Obasi lifted a hand and traced the edge of the bowl as if mapping a coastline. "I have to go back," he said finally. The words dropped heavy, not sudden, not reckless, a line drawn after too many circles. "To where I came from, to my brother's resting place, to the old shed by the river. There are tools left, nets, and—" he swallowed. "A small boat tucked under the thorn trees. I couldn't look at it. I left it there to rot with the rest of me." Alzer stared at the doorway where the rain still shone like a curtain of beads. In the back of the yard, the stream sounded closer than before, as if the storm had moved it a few steps nearer. The water caught the firelight and flickered on the ceiling like fish scales. "You'll come back," she said. Not a question, but her voice held a crack she couldn't seal. "If the road holds," he answered. "If the river doesn't take me." A tired smile ghosted his mouth. "If I have the courage to face what I left." The eldest turned her head so he wouldn't see her fear. The middle wrapped the cloth tighter around his leg. The youngest, half asleep, tightened fingers on the fabric of his trousers as if holding a kite string in sudden wind. Obasi looked toward the stream where the yard fell away, where water always whispered of elsewhere. "All my life," he said, "I chased animals that ran. Maybe it is time I bring something that carries." His eyes flicked to Alzer, to the girls, back to the dark outside. "Something that can hold a family on water. Something that doesn't have teeth." The house listened, even the fire stills, to catch a sentence like that. Alzer felt the old terror lift its head. Departure, return, the space between. It tasted like the days before her husband's fever took him, when each sunrise felt like both promise and debt. She swallowed. "The village will talk," she said. "They will," he agreed. "Let them talk of what I bring back if I come back. If, the smallest word, the heaviest, rain thinned to a mist." The wind went quiet enough for the crickets to claim the night again. Beyond the fence, the stream pulled moonlight down its spine and slipped on, patient and certain, toward a river that remembered every name thrown into it, and everyone begged back out. Alzer walked to the threshold and stood with one hand on the lintel. The square, washed clean, reflected a distorted sky. The headman's door was dark. The old woman's lamp was a soft ember. Somewhere a young man coughed and then laughed at himself, embarrassed. The world wore a new seam where the morning's anger had split, and the evening's mercy had tried, awkwardly, to stitch it. Behind her, the daughters settled. Beside her, a man who had once run sat still. Before her, a path that did not exist yesterday seemed to glow faintly in wet soil and lamplight. The storm had not made anyone a saint. It had only stripped them of what they could hide behind. What remained would have to be enough. Obasi exhaled and closed his eyes. "When the light comes," he said, "I go." The stream answered with its thin voice, almost like breath. Alzer did not know whether it sounded like welcome or warning. She stood in the doorway and let the night hold its question a little longer. The taste of rain on her lips, the bruise-colored sky opening the smallest seam toward dawn. The first sound was the slap of an oar cutting water. At dawn, the stream behind Alzer's house carried a small boat into view, its hull patched with tar and rope, its bow heavy with nets and a wooden chest. Obasi stood inside it, tall despite his wound, guiding the vessel through the mist. The water shone pale gold, the reeds bending under the breeze, as though the whole village had gathered to watch a man return from the dead. Children ran along the banks pointing. Old men muttered in surprise. Women fetching water paused, their jars tilting in their arms. By the time he tied the boat to the crooked tree near the yard, a crowd had gathered. The headman himself appeared, stern-faced, flanked by two young men who had once carried Obasi home through the storm. Obasi lifted the chest from the boat and opened it in the square for all to see. Inside lay tools, nets, and a bundle of ropes. "Not traps," he said, his voice steady. "Work. For the water, not the blood." His words struck deeper than the display itself. At first the villagers watched in silence. Then one boy stepped forward and touched the boat's edge with reverence, as though it were a creature risen from the stream. "It can carry us," he whispered. His voice cracked the tension. Suddenly, the square hummed with possibility. Someone muttered about fishing further, another about carrying firewood across the stream instead of walking miles around. The headman frowned but did not silence them. The boat had already spoken louder than any decree. Alzer stood at the edge, her daughters beside her. The eldest no longer crossed her arms when she looked at Obasi. She held her chin high, pride and uncertainty mingling. The middle daughter's eyes shone, full of questions about the new life this vessel might bring. The youngest tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "Now he is one of us." But the moment did not remain gentle. A familiar voice cut through the murmurs, the creditor arriving with a swagger, his cloak dry despite the damp ground. He strode into the square, counting coins in his hand, the sound like stones dropped in a bowl. "Fine," he said, his eyes narrow on Alzer. "You found yourself a helper. That won't erase what you owe. The deadline is today." The crowd stiffened. Some stepped back. The laughter and murmurs died. Alzer felt her throat tighten. The storm had not broken her, but this man's grip on her home still threatened to crush everything. She clutched her daughter's hands. Then Obasi stepped forward, surprising even her. He set the chest on the ground, lifted the nets, and held them high. "You want coin," he said to the creditor. "But coin comes from work. We have tools now. We have water. We will pay not by begging but by labor." The creditor sneered. "Labor is wind. Debt is stone." At that, one of the young men who had helped Obasi before shouted, "Then let us work together. We will fish with him. We will sell what we catch." Another woman lifted her voice, sharper than the creditor's sneer. "And I will buy. Better to buy from my neighbor than from traders who rob us." The tide turned quickly. The crowd, once hostile, now surged with a new rhythm. Even those who had whispered against Alzer before spoke of helping, of joining the effort, of pulling nets instead of pulling each other down. The creditor's smirk faltered. He glanced around, seeing numbers stack against him in a way coin never could. He muttered something about keeping account, then stepped back, his pride dented but his grip not entirely gone. Work began at once. The montage of days blurred into one another. Obasi teaching the men how to mend nets, children helping to sort fish by size, women carrying baskets of catch to market. The stream that had once divided now carried hope across its back. Alzer, with sleeves rolled high, worked beside Obasi and her daughters, their hands rough, but their laughter returning in bursts. The eldest smiled more now, though she hid it behind her hair. The middle counted each coin with sharp eyes, determined not to be cheated. The youngest rode in the boat as though it were a throne, her giggles carried over the water. When the creditor returned, the family placed coins in his hand. Not much, but enough to show the tide had shifted. He stared at the silver, then at the faces of the villagers watching him. Something like reluctance, maybe even respect, flickered across his face. He tucked the coin away without a word and walked off. That night, Obasi sat by the fire, the nets drying beside him, his hands raw, but his eyes calm. Alzer watched him with a heart heavier than joy, for she knew peace was never permanent. But for the first time in years, her house did not feel like a burden. It felt like a hearth. Then came the twist that unsettled her again. Obasi rose and walked outside to check the boat, but instead of securing it, he paused. His hand lingered on the wood, as though it were not only a vessel, but a memory. Alzer followed quietly and heard him whisper, "Brother, I carried the trap out, but now I carry something else." His words were not for her, but for the night, a confession to a ghost that still lived in the reeds. She stood in the doorway, trembling. He was healing, yes, but healing could also mean leaving. The boat was not only for them. It might also be the path that drew him away. When he turned and saw her, his face softened, but he said nothing. He only placed his hand over the boat's bow as if promising something the water alone could understand. Alzer returned inside, the daughters already asleep in a tangle of limbs. She lay down on her mat, but stared at the roof, listening to the stream. Its whisper seemed louder now, carrying questions instead of answers. The house was stronger. The family was closer. The village was shifting. But the water always flowed onward, and as sleep pulled at her eyes, a fear pressed into her chest. Would the boat, which had saved them, one day carry him away? The bell of a cow clanged in the distance, but the village square was hushed. A canopy of woven palm leaves stretched above, garlanded with fresh flowers, their scent heavy in the warm air. People pressed close, not out of scorn as before, but curiosity and something softer, like respect, they had forgotten how to give. At the center, Alzer stood with her daughters, their dresses simple yet bright, hand-stitched by neighbors who only months ago would have turned away. By her side, Obasi leaned on a carved staff, his limp still visible, but his posture tall. The sight alone silenced the last murmurs. The headman, in his ceremonial robe, lifted his hands. "This house," he began, "was once called a burden. Now it stands as a mirror. When storms broke roofs, they rebuilt. When traps threatened children, they tore them out. When debt pressed, they worked together. Let this union be a sign to us all." His words struck against the crowd not as orders, but as confessions of what everyone had seen unfold with their own eyes. Gasps rippled when Obasi reached for Alzer's hand, the two palms scarred in different ways, but closing together like halves of one whole. The daughters smiled, radiant, no longer ashamed to be seen. The neighbors, once sharp-tongued, leaned closer, drawn by the gravity of what was happening in front of them. It was not a grand wedding, no rich cloth, no drums, only a vow spoken in silence, marked by the joining of hands, witnessed by a village that had doubted too long. And then the twist came, unexpected but undeniable. The creditor pushed through the crowd, his cloak brushing against knees, his eyes glittering with unfinished malice. "You marry in peace while your debt remains?" he scoffed. "What lesson do you teach, that promises can be washed away by storms?" The air tightened, old fear creeping back into the villagers' shoulders. Obasi stepped forward before Alzer could speak. He motioned to the stream where the small boat lay tethered. "Bring what we caught this week, wait gone so," he commanded, his voice carrying. The daughters ran, pulling baskets from the boat, fish fat and gleaming, more than the village had seen in a season. They spilled onto mats in the square, tails thrashing, mouths gaping. Murmurs rose. Even the creditor blinked. "These nets," Obasi said, lifting one high, "paid what was owed." He turned, and with deliberate calm, placed a pouch of coins in the creditor's palm. "We owe nothing now but the labor of our hands to the water that feeds us." The creditor's mouth opened, but no sound came. His fingers closed on the pouch, the weight undeniable. He looked up, saw the faces, neighbors who would not let him mock this family again, and for the first time he stepped back without a word. The power drained from him like water from a cracked jar. The crowd erupted, not with jeers but applause, raw and uneven, carried on the wind like thunder breaking. Women clapped their hands against their thighs, children whistled, men lifted their voices in cheers. The flowers above swayed, shedding petals that rained down like a blessing. For Alzer, the sound filled her bones. She looked at her daughters, at Obasi, at the faces that once spat at her door. Something inside her that had been hollow for years swelled until she thought it might break her open. Her eyes burned, but she did not weep. She stood straighter, the weight of shame lifted. The motifs of her life glimmered around her. The house once split with cracks now stood patched and firm, walls bright with new clay smoothed by neighbors' hands. The stream no longer whispered only loss. It carried a boat, steady and waiting, symbol of journeys not of exile but of belonging. The daughters, once hushed by hunger, now laughed freely, their voices like bells striking against the square. The ceremony ended with no feast but with food shared. Fish roasted, bread broken, bowls passed from hand to hand. The square, once a place of judgment, became a table. Even the headman, stiff as he was, sat on the ground among them, eating beside children. As night fell, lanterns flickered on posts, their glow reflected in the stream. Alzer sat by the doorway of her house, her hand in Obasi's, her daughters curled against each other inside. The village hummed with new life. Laughter drifted from houses. The scent of firewood and roasted fish thickened the air, but inside her chest, beneath the calm, a single note rang low and deep. She had chosen compassion over fear, and it had remade everything. Yet compassion was not the end. It was the beginning of a path she could not yet see the end of. She looked at the boat, its bow gleaming faintly in the moonlight, a promise and a question all at once. Obasi's thumb brushed her scarred palm. He did not speak. He didn't need to. His presence was a vow heavier than words. The night deepened. The last lanterns dimmed, and as the village settled into silence, Alzer felt the echo of storms past and storms to come. Would the peace they had built hold, or was it only the calm between tempests? Her gaze lingered on the stream, dark and endless, carrying reflections of stars. The boat rocked gently in the current, patient, waiting. The sound of water against its sides was soft, but it carried the weight of tomorrow. And in that silence, with her family beside her, and her village no longer against her, Alzer's heart held steady, but her soul leaned forward, listening for the answer the river would one day bring. When storms arrive in life, they often strike without warning, tearing through walls, uprooting what we thought was unshakable, and leaving us trembling in their wake. Yet it is within those storms that the deepest truths about humanity are revealed. Fear can build traps sharper than any steel, but compassion can dismantle them piece by piece. Poverty, shame, and judgment may weigh heavily, but the quiet choice to see another's pain as one's own has the power to transform not only a household, but an entire community. True strength does not lie in armor or in pride. It lives in the courage to lift what others would leave behind, to mend what the world has called broken, to speak with actions when words are drowned by the noise of doubt. Every small gesture, sharing food, patching a roof, offering a hand, becomes part of a larger story that reshapes what it means to belong. A house, once called a burden, can become a sanctuary. A stream once whispered with loss can carry hope, and the hardest scars can become reminders not of defeat, but of endurance. Life will always bring new storms, new judgments, new debts of the spirit. But the legacy of compassion is stronger than any storm. It asks us to look at one another not as weight to be carried reluctantly, but as mirrors through which we glimpse our own humanity. To choose kindness is to plant seeds that outlive the moment, to weave bonds that outlast misfortune, to build vessels that can carry generations safely across troubled waters. Perhaps the lesson, then, is not about victory or defeat, but about the courage to keep choosing each other, even when the world demands we turn away. For in that choice lies the quiet revolution that can heal wounds deeper than flesh, repair homes more fragile than stone, and guide us toward a peace more enduring than silence. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If its message touched you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, to subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart, and to walk with us on this journey of words and compassion. Your voice matters here, and we would be honored to hear it.